Hi everyone, and welcome back to Learnosity's webinar series. Thanks for joining us today for our third and final long-term support webinar for 2020. My name is Michael Sharman. I'm the Director of Product at Learnosity, and I'm based in our Sydney office. Firstly, just some housekeeping. You are on mute, but if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can ask them in the control panel. A member of staff will respond to any of questions that you have via email after the webinar. You can always log a ticket through our support portal at help.learnosity.com with any follow-up questions or any questions that you have in general. And of course, anyone who's registered for this webinar will be sent the recording this week. 2020 has truly been a landmark year for educational technology. During this year's acceleration online, as well as the recent back-to-school period that we saw with our Northern Hemisphere customers, we were able to appreciate the scale of the shift to digital learning. As Learnosity delivered almost 500 million sessions in the year to date so far, and that's almost 3.5 billion responses. And so we're striving to meet the challenges posed by 2020, and we think our new LTS demonstrates a commitment to raising the standard that we strive for in the education technology industry. In today's webinar, we're going to be looking at all the features from our latest long-term support release, that was 2020.3.LTS. So first, let's just briefly run through what features we released on the 4th of November throughout assessment, authoring, and data and analytics. For assessment, we released an array of drawing question type enhancements. We had some pre-filled backgrounds that you can choose as an author. We added support for right-to-left languages and some performance increases thanks to an efficiency boost from the storage of the drawing responses. We've also made a variety of other code and content revisions for accessibility. For the authoring team, we have added the Advanced Author API-based activity editor inside the author site. You can also now customize the controls for the rich text editor when you are editing question content. And you can now update existing items to include a specific workflow state that is with our publishing workflow that we added throughout the year earlier on. For data and analytics, we have an easy way to fix validation rules that may have been set incorrectly in order to rescore exams. This is a big one. Lots of people have been asking for this, so I can't wait to show you that one soon. Firstly, let's give you a closer look at our assessment release. As I mentioned, the drawing question type has had a slew of updates. So before, where you had to upload your own image always for the background for the drawing canvas, and that's still an option of course, now you can select one of our pre-filled backgrounds. And this allows you to create a drawing question more quickly, more easily for things that might be common tasks. So you can choose from a pre-filled gridded, dotted or lined backgrounds. And those backgrounds we think are useful for geometry and other free response style math questions. Let's have a quick look at what I'm talking about. Right now I am in the Learnosity author site. The section in the middle is what you're going to be seeing if you're embedding the author API inside your own environment. Now I'm in a drawing question type at the moment. This should look familiar for those of you who have been using this to date. And what you can see down here is this background. Now at the moment I have a white background there for the student. But we can add any of these three out of the box. It just means you don't need to upload a specific background if you want either gridded or dotted or ruled paper that the student's going to use. Now, of course, you can edit that and upload any background image that you might normally want to use, but out of the box, you have three backgrounds that you can enable if you see fit. Also with our drawing question type, we now see a lot of usage in the Middle East. We have a lot of customers making headways in that region. So we've made our drawing question type compatible with right to left languages like Arabic, Hebrew or Persian. And you can expect to see some more bidirectional language support being extended as we get throughout the next year through more question types. We have 9 question types so far, as well as the HTML passage. And finally, we figured out an efficiency boost, which has allowed us to reduce the student response payload by around 50% without compromising the quality. This is really good news for customers. It allows the drawing type to work faster on devices and, of course, over the network if you're doing any sort of reporting. So about a 50% reduction in the payload of student responses for the drawing question type. Of course, accessibility. Accessibility is a theme that we are constantly striving to do more with, and we've continued to build the support that we already have. We've made 42 new code and content revisions for accessibility to improve the user experience. Things like skip to navigation links at the end of each item, the window dialogues that you see. And the purpose of these revisions is to address issues that we identified in our recent accessibility audit so that we can better face the challenges and ultimately help learners achieve the best learning outcomes possible. Inclusive design is where our heads are always at. Okay, next up, let's take a look at some of our authoring features. Firstly, we've enabled the Author API-based activity editor inside the author site. Now, some of you might be using the author site, some of you might be embedding the API in your own content admin areas. So for those using the Learnosity site, this is now an option for you to enable. And you can bring in the publishing workflow rules that you've seen before, like filtering an activity list by users, by tags. You can also see activity titles as well as the references. You can browse multiple item banks. You can also filter item banks using our integration with academic benchmarks. Let's have a quick look so I can show you what we're talking about. So here we are in our activities area of the Learnosity author site. You can see a familiar user interface. This looks like the item edit experience, but this one is for activities. Now I could create one, but I'll go in and edit one that already exists. Now there are different things you can do here. You can quickly enable or disable the intro and outro items. All this stuff's sort of been there a little while before, but is now available again within the Learnosity author site. Setting titles and tweaking options that you might see in the assessment player. Also a handy workflow here when you're adding items to activities or to tests or assessments, whatever you want to call them. You can either create items inline or you can find items. Now finding items, got some extensions here. Firstly, you can filter by academic benchmark standards. That is again our partnership with academic benchmarks. You can choose the authority there depending on your license with them and start to filter content that way. Also, you might be using multiple item banks, whether you're licensing one of our partner item banks or you happen to have multiple item banks configured. You can now add items to one activity based on different item banks. Also, now you can customize the default toolbar that appears when formatting questions and features, and this allows content administrators to hide or to rearrange menu options that are available for authors to use. Let's have a quick look to see what I mean. Okay, so here we have our demo site and we have a full screen view of a multiple choice question and edit panel. And you can scroll up, you can see this is the default panel that we have here, all 28 buttons. And here's an example of what you might want to do. Now you can see we've really reduced, for the sake of the example, reduced a lot of the things out. You might not want authors to upload images, you might not want them to use tables, those sorts of things. You can decide what you want to appear here and the order in which they appear. It's worth noting, of course, that you can configure different options for different groups of authors, again, depending on who your content creators are and what their objectives are. Finally, for authoring, we released a little while ago some publishing workflow rules. We have out-of-the-box publishing workflow that you can send your content through, draft, review, ready for approval, those sorts of things. If those don't suit your needs, you can set your own custom workflow states. But what happens to existing items you already have in your item bank? We now have a programmatic way of updating the workflow state in bulk via the Data API. And last but of course far from least, in today's webinar we're going to look at our data and analytics release and see that it contains really the star, I suppose, of the latest LTS. And what we're talking about is rescoring. So auto scoring, we know, can be a major time saver for teachers or for customers. But when the scoring logic is maybe authored incorrectly, things can go a bit tricky. Now, it's easy to adjust the validation rules and rescore exams so that students can get the right results. Now, we know this is going to save customers a huge amount of time and effort, but let's get into it a little bit and have a look at why and when you might want to use this. So we have a scenario. Mrs. Crabapple has created a test, but she accidentally sets the wrong validation rules. Milhouse takes the test, checks his score, and he sees that he did give the right answer, but his score is 0. What does he do? Well, what we can do now is Mrs. Crabapple can fix the auto scoring rules and then trigger a data API job, so we can see that although Milhouse got answer C incorrect on the bottom left, he now gets C correct. He didn't need to resit. It all happens in the background once you trigger a data API job. Also, what happens if a student, let's just say Bart, says answer B is valid as well, and he's very convincing? You might want to add an alternate response in the authoring environment. Trigger a data API job, and then you can see that B as well as C might be correct. You could choose to give half points if you wanted to, or full points. Well, what happens if Ms. Hoover gave the same test to her class and she also thinks that answer A is valid? Well, now you could duplicate the item if you wanted to, add an alternate response, and then trigger a data API job. So the point here is you can update the original item that the student saw to fix incorrect validation, but you can also duplicate the item and have only that separate copy have different alternate validation rules. Now, what you can do is do the rescore against either the original item or a new item. So what you need to do this is access the data API's new endpoint, the update sessions items. So again, you can modify and correct any alternate responses or the original response and their scores. You can modify the maximum score, any penalty scoring, those sorts of things. This is compatible with all question types, by the way, all auto-scorable question types. Then we will update the scores for the given student session or sessions. The choice is yours. You can either provide the original item to update the score against or a copy item. So again, if you want to duplicate the item and rescore against that, you can do it that way as well. Now, what happens if the student wants to go and review their assessment? Well, you have the choice. In the reports API as well as the assessment APIs, you can pass a flag to view either the original or the scoreable item. So you can choose which version you want to display for resume, for review, and for reporting. Thank you. That concludes our general overview of the latest long-term support release. Thanks again for everybody for all the hard work involved. And of course, we're already working on the next long-term support release, 2021.1. This is going to be released in February next year. So stay tuned for more features then. Of course, thanks for attending today. Once again, if you have any questions, please log a ticket at help.learnosity.com. And if you've already asked a question in the panel, we'll follow up via email shortly. Look forward to hearing from you soon. We'll see you next time.